Hi, I'm Julia, and welcome back to NB Library. This month in the United States, it is Native American Heritage Month, November, and in honor of that, I wanted to concentrate on reading some Native American authors from my TBR. Of course, we should read Native American authors every month, but this particular month I wanted to have a special focus on those. I've got a tentative TBR, and I've already started one of my books, which is Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange. This is the sequel to There There, a book that I read back in, I think, 2021, which is sort of a family saga. Wandering Stars even more so than There There. There There is following a big cast of characters of Native Americans in Oakland, and There There is going chronologically through the roots of what I think are going to be one family, and then sort of following some of the characters that we met in There, and it's already really beautiful, devastating, and I think that the way that Orange is playing with these themes and themes that came up in the first book are so masterful, the way that the language and the imagery are all contributing to these themes of substance abuse, family trauma, seeing things from a different perspective, and massacres and public shootings. Some other books on my TBR that I'm hoping to get to this month. I'll start with the ones on my physical TBR. We've got Blonde Indian by Ernestine Hayes. It is technically Native American and Native Alaskan Heritage Month, so this is by a Native Alaskan, and a memoir about Ernestine Hayes' life. A book I just purchased recently, How We Go Home, which is an essay collection, edited by Sarah Sinclair. This has been on my TBR since before it came out, and it's one of the oldest books on my TBR, so I'd really love to get to it this month. And then ones I'll be getting from the library, probably on audio, are Resball by Byron Graves and Looking for Smoke by K.A. Coble. Resball is young adult about a young man playing basketball, and I believe it also explores his relationship with his brother. And then Looking for Smoke is a story told from 4 teens' perspectives after they witness a murder at a powwow. I had other books that are by Indigenous authors that are on my TBR, but they are by, mostly if they're not by a Native American author, they're by an Indigenous Canadian author. I'm thinking I might do a dedicated vlog to Indigenous Heritage Month in Canada, which is in June. I'm gonna get back to listening to Wandering Stars. I'll let you know what I think of it when I'm done, and then what I'm gonna be reading next. I'm out on a walk and there's no one out here, so I thought I'd give a quick update without embarrassing myself. I started listening to the audiobook of Looking for Smoke by K.A. Coble, and I'm liking it so far. I'm interested in all of the relationship dynamics going on. I love it when audiobooks with different narrators have different actual people narrating, so that really brings some depth to it. We'll talk about this more later, but I stopped listening to the audiobook of Wandering Stars because I wanted to read it physically, and then I got a copy from the library, and then I was like, no, I need to own this, so I've been annotating it, so I'll go over my annotation process in a little bit, but because of that, I needed a new audiobook to listen to, so I started listening to the other one. I'm only a little bit of a ways in, but I can definitely see myself continuing to listen to this one and enjoying it. As I mentioned in my earlier update, I went out and bought a copy of The Wandering Stars. Look at me, I'm turning into a real booktuber. I'm annotating and everything. I don't usually annotate books. I very often have a physical copy of the book that I can annotate like this. Usually it's on audio or my e-reader, or I've borrowed it from the library, but this book is so beautiful and so incredibly written that I felt it just begged to be annotated. As I mentioned in my introduction to talking about this book, when I had already started listening to the audio, I had mentioned that I was seeing these themes and motifs, and those have continued throughout the book, and so I really wanted to track them and see where those were leading to and how they were cropping up over and over again across all of these generations. So the pink is a motif of stars. I'm literally just tracking the word star as it comes up, but it's called Wandering Stars, and the first character he chooses Jude Starr to be his name, and also you can see from the graphic that It's taking the idea of wandering stars as bullets, which is fitting in with the public shooting theme and a theme of gun violence. The green is the theme of substance abuse, specifically the perceived spirituality or sense of freedom that comes from substance abuse. And then the blue is a change in perspective. So that's things like seeing something from a bird's eye view. That one comes up a lot. And then the yellow is massacres, gun violence, and public shootings. Because I got this copy when I was about halfway through the book, it's not fully annotated. There's a big section that doesn't really have any annotations. And I might go back through and note down kind of things that I notice, like I have done with the first few sections. Yeah, I can absolutely see myself rereading this and going over it again. I mean, there are just some absolutely incredible passages. There's this one that I wanted to read that made me buy the book, where when I saw it, I had to like put my library copy down and go like, oh man. So this character Sean is kind of saying that he is identifying as like queer or non-binary, but because of his family is really unable to pursue that thought more. It says, he was not convinced enough he would be accepted in LGBTQAI plus circles or groups or clubs or cliques to ever try to join anything or attempt to make friends with people he thought belonged to the acronym. Belonging to the acronym felt to him like a secret society he didn't know how to become a part of. Or did the plus at the end of the acronym mean to say, and you too, in an ever-widening umbrella meant to cover as many people as possible from the inevitable rain meant to soak the minds of those lost to a system of definitions that increasingly did not include them. It's stunning. The writing is absolutely stunning. So like I said, I'm about halfway through. I'm absolutely blown away by this book, and it could be a 5-star, but I'll get back to you and let you know when I'm done.
All right, I have no idea if this is going to be any good since I'm out on a walk, and I don't know, it might be nausea-inducing for some people. But I finished Looking for Smoke by K.A. Cobell early this morning. I'd fallen asleep listening to it last night, so I was just finishing up the last 20 minutes or so. And I really liked this. One of the only mysteries that I've read this year. I don't read a lot of those. And I could not predict who the killer was. I only figured it out around the same time that the characters did. I felt like there weren't all that many clues, so it wasn't like necessarily a fair play mystery. Because I've heard about those, that like they give you enough clues that you can figure it out on your own. But I think sometimes that relies on knowing mystery tropes, which I don't really. I can almost never figure out who the killer is in a murder mystery. But this is particularly talking about the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So I'm going to link down below to a link where you can donate to a group that is helping bring awareness to this issue. And it ended up being sad, of course, but also I thought that the female characters, so there's 4 characters, they're all teens, they all witness a murder of one of their schoolmates at a powwow, and there's 2 girls and 2 boys, and some of them have a pretty solid alibi, and some of them don't, so you're not sure if one of the narrators could be the killer. But the girls were really strong and great, and had started out the book like not exactly being enemies, but sort of antagonistic to each other. Lauren, who grew up on the Blackfeet Reservation, was a little bit standoffish to Mara, who's half Blackfeet and who had just moved there 3 months prior. But they were great, and then the 2 other characters were Eli and Brody, And I won't tell you who, but some really cute romances developed between some characters. I thought it was well written. There were some points where I felt like the thesaurus had been brought out unnecessarily, but it was very thrilling and well paced. I think the ending was very satisfying. So yeah, I gave it 4 stars. And then sometime today, maybe on this walk, maybe later, I'm going to start listening to Council of Dolls by Susan Power. So I have Resball on hold, but it's not going to come in time in order for me to finish this video, so I wanted to check out another audiobook by a Native American author, so I chose this one. And this is an adult literary fiction, also sort of a family saga. Susan Mona Power also wrote The Grass Dancer, which I read I think around this time last year, which is also sort of a family saga, one of those like multiple POV going throughout time, all centered on kind of the same group of characters. So this book I think is kind of similar. It's following several women and has some speculative elements of like these dolls that sort of give them advice, I think. So I've got that on audio, and I think it's going to be sad. And since it's adult, I think it's going to be more intense than Looking for Smoke, which is YA. So I'm a little nervous about that, and about how the tone is going to be. But I did like The Grass Dancer, and it did have like a hopeful ending. So I hope that that also happens here. And I will let you know my review when I'm done.
Just finished Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange, and I don't think I can give it anything less than a 5-star. It's one of the most beautifully written books that I've read all year. Maybe one of the most beautifully written books that I've ever read. And it did take a little bit of extra concentration because of the language style to really understand what the words were saying, especially since I'm not listening to it on audio, and some of the long sentences were a little bit easier to understand on audio. But I really loved this book. I thought it was incredible. So part 1 of this book is kind of the family saga, as I had mentioned previously. We're following this kind of star family throughout the generations, and then part 2 we're following all of the members of modern day star family in the wake of this mass shooting that one of the brothers, Orville, was a victim of, and all of them dealing with addiction and just being Native in modern times. There's 3 brothers, Loney, Luther, and Orville, and then their great aunt, who they call their grandmother, who raised them, Opal, and then Opal's sister Jackie, who is their biological grandmother, but because she had her daughter, their mother, as a product of rape, she's not really involved in their lives, and is also, at this point in the book, struggling with recovery from addiction, and was out of their lives for a long time because of her addiction. In this point in the book, she's been sober for 6 months, she's going to AA meetings, and is living with them, and they're just trying to be a family. Orville starts to get addicted to pain medication prescribed to him after his bullet wound, and makes friends with a classmate, Sean, who I read a little bit of excerpts from earlier, whose dad makes drugs, and so the two of them are hanging out, getting high, making music. And then it follows the other brothers and Luther and his relationship with his girlfriend, and then Loney and his own mental health struggles, and then conversations between Opal and Jackie, being sisters, trying to be a family, trying to be there for these boys. And I just wanted everyone to be okay and everyone to come out all right after everything that they'd gone through. The things that I was tracking in part one sort of fell by the wayside or morphed into a different theme in part two. So the blue being change in perspective morphed into a bird motif. And before that change in perspective had been associated with like a bird's eye view or seeing things from a bird's perspective, and then the bird motifs kind of took over that thread in part two. There's also part three, but it's very short, it's only a few chapters. There were still a few mentions of stars, and part two is really tackling addiction and recovery from addiction, and so the freedom that comes from substance abuse or change in perspective that comes from substance abuse, that thread became more about just substance abuse as something that is a cycle, a spiral, something that is feeling impossible to get away from. And then the massacre and gun violence thread did not come up as much in part two. Orville is a survivor of one and is, at the beginning of part two, a little bit obsessed with survivors of school shootings, but that thread also kind of, I think, naturally fades as they talk more about addiction and family and what you owe to your family, what your family owes to you, how you can be part of a family, what it means to be native, what it means to be native living on unceded native land that is not your own. And yeah, I just thought it was so beautiful. It was so incredibly written, just bordering on poetry, the language was at some points. So I'm very glad that I read it. I'm very glad that I annotated it, and I'm gonna keep this copy with all the annotations and everything so that I can go back to it and hopefully someday reread it and add to the annotations, especially the sections that I listen to on audio, so I can track those motifs and themes a little bit more. And this book is actually going on my shelf right next to The Grass Dancer, which is very fitting because I think The Grass Dancer was one of the inspirations for There and this book. I just finished listening to the audiobook of The Council of Dolls by Mona Susan Power, and I ended up really enjoying this book. I thought it was so beautiful, and there were definitely some really hard parts, really sad, tragic things, not only in personal lives, but also speaking about the horrors of Indian boarding schools, just this genocide and generational trauma. And this ended up being another family saga in this video. I haven't really been reading much the last week. I've been writing, working on a fantasy novel, and my rigorous booktube schedule that I set for myself did not account for me getting hyperfixated on other things they're not reading. The hyperfixations, they come and they go as they please. So I was listening to this on audio for several days. It took me over a week, I believe. And while sometimes I didn't want to pick up the audiobook, once I started to listen to it, I just found myself sucked in over and over again. Sometimes I wasn't always in the mood for it, and I wanted to listen to music and think about my story, but I was really determined to finish it tonight, so I found some chores to do while I was listening to it. And this is a sort of family saga story in reverse, told in reverse chronological order, and I really liked the way that was set up, where first you see characters as adults and then go back to their childhood. So we're following 3 generations of women in this Dakota family. The first character that we spend time with is a young girl in the 60s. She goes by several names, but in this first section, she goes by the name of Sissy. That's the name that her family calls her. And she is navigating this difficult relationship with her mother. Her mother has so much trauma that has really steered her life and steered her relationship with her father and her daughter, and the whole family has to navigate her moods and kind of help her regulate her moods. And Sissy, who's only 9, is really helping, being a kind of stabilizing force for her mother, while at the same time being terrified of a time that her mood is going to change. And Sissy has a doll that she's named Ethel, who is a little black Thumbelina doll, and Ethel talks to her and is very wise and gives her advice. And I was so impressed by this very first section of the way that Power is able to get in a child's head and speak with a child's voice while talking about these very adult concepts. This is an adult story, although many of the narrators are children, adolescents, when their story is being told. And I think that Power has this really powerful, if you'll excuse the pun, grasp on voice and writing of all of these different people with different ages and backgrounds, and able to get across so much of their personality just through this first-person narration. We then go back to the 30s when Sissy's mother Lillian is growing up. It's Depression era. She's living on the Dakota Reservation. She has this beloved sister named Blanche, who is a tomboy and also alternatively an ally and a sort of tormentor to Lillian. They live with their mother and father. Their father is verbally abusive to their mother and struggling with alcoholism, while their mother is raising the 3 daughters and 2 twin boys and trying to keep the family together and run the household, while sometimes her husband is off God knows where. And Lillian, like her mother Cora before her, has to go to reservation school or Indian boarding school during the school year. At least they're able to come home around the holidays, but that is an extremely horrible and harrowing experience. But luckily, Lillian has a doll of her own, a Shirley Temple doll that she can talk to, named May. And May, like Ethel, who will come after her, is a source of joy and wisdom for Lillian through all these horrible things happening at the boarding school. Lillian and Blanche are also meeting what will be Lillian's future husband, Cornelius, and his brother Luther, who we see in the first section as Sissy's father. Cornelius being her father, not Luther. And because of the way that we see Lillian as an adult, it's just especially tragic seeing her as a child and having all of these childlike hopes and fears and relationships, and knowing how much these experiences that she's having are going to shape her and traumatize her and end up traumatizing her daughter. We then, in the third section, go all the way back to Lillian's mother, Cora, who is living in the 1910s, also attending a reservation school. And it is actually the Carlisle School, which was a historical reservation school in Pennsylvania set up by Richard Pratt, who is actually a point of view character in Wandering Stars. It's over here, but it's covered by my dice tower. That was a very interesting seeing that historical figure into fiction books back to back, and how Wandering Stars and Council of Dolls are so similar, or rather dealing with very similar concepts, while also being 2 very, very different books. And then there is another significant section of the book, but I don't want to spoil that and who we follow there. Oh, and I forgot to mention that Cora also has a doll, a traditional doll made of buckskin and other natural materials that's passed down in her family who she talks to as well. So there are all these speculative elements. I think being just very literal, like dolls and these like magical talking doll spirits, while also being kind of in their own way a metaphor for the way that I think girls growing up, or people assigned women at birth, do have to maintain, you know, trying to be a child while also kind of navigating this dual self of a grown-up and a grown-up voice and all these grown-up expectations on you, and you know, being told to act a certain way, behave a certain way, and how you want to be a grown-up and you want to be a lady, a woman so badly, while also, you know, clinging to that childhood innocence at the same time. So I really enjoyed this book, even more than I expected to, and I'm going to rate it 4.5 stars. The next book that I'm going to be reading for this vlog is Blonde Indian by Ernestine Hayes. I believe I already talked a little bit about this book. It's been so long since I filmed the intro, so sorry, I really can't remember. But this is a memoir by Ernestine Hayes, who's Tlingit. I think there might be some elements of nature writing as well, just in the first few pages that I've read. So I will hopefully read this pretty quickly. I'm getting down to the wire on when I need to post this. But it's less than 200 pages, so I'm looking forward to getting started on this. I just finished Blonde Indian by Ernestine Hayes. Got through it pretty quickly, and I enjoyed it. I'm gonna follow the principle of several other people here and choose not to give it a star rating, because I agree with people that says it's kind of weird to rate a memoir. Like, you can rate the writing style, but it's hard to give a star rating to someone's life story. The writing style did have some issues with repeating information sometimes in like one paragraph after the other, but I think that could have just been solved with a stronger editing pass, so I'm not gonna ding it too much for that. This really felt like someone just like you're sitting next to at a campfire or something, or sitting in, you know, shooting the shit on a porch step, and they're telling you their life story. As well as a lot of themes that have cropped up in other books that I've read for this video, with missionary or residential schools, and multiple characters or multiple people struggling with alcoholism and extreme poverty, but also a very strong sense of family and knowing where you came from, being tied to the land. There are some really beautiful sections in here that are nature writing and talking about different seasons and ecology of the Juneau area, the Tongass National Forest, and being out in the bay. Definitely an area that I would love to visit someday. Ernestine goes from her childhood, where she's being watched by her grandmother while her mother is in a hospital for tuberculosis treatment, on to living with her mother, moving down to Tacoma, Washington from Juneau, Alaska, and then all the way down to California, and then her long struggle with being homeless and having abusive or neglectful partners and her 3 sons, and then eventually hitchhiking and kind of scraping together money and making her way back to Alaska and back home when she's in her 40s, and then becoming a sort of native guide and going on these whale watching boats and also these outdoor performances with this performance group, and having been away for so long, coming back home again and reconnecting with the stories that her grandmother told her as a child, and reconnecting with her family again. Also interspersed are what I think, but can't be 100% sure, is a fictional story about this family of another Tlingit person, a man named Tom, and then his descendant, also named Toms, that become Old Tom and Young Tom, and then Young Tom having a daughter, Patricia. And it clearly wasn't a story from Hayes's family, because the characters are not born when she was born, so It's just, I think, a piece of fiction that is helping illustrate what life is like for Native Alaskans living in this kind of urban environment that has been transplanted on top of their ancestral land. And all of the, as I said, poverty that comes with that, and having to go get a job on a fishing boat, being away from your wife and kid for several months, and hoping that you're going to get paid out by the captain eventually, and, you know, returning home. So that was an interesting aspect to this, and I think it lended more dimension to the story, although it did take me out every time we switched over to be like, who is this guy? Is this real or not? And it's never like addressed by the clearly nonfiction memoir parts of the book. It's also interesting that, I just noticed this was blurbed by Susan Mona Power, or Mona Susan Power, I can never get that right, sorry. But anyway, I thought it was interesting that I could definitely see the Tlingit practices talked about here, and the Tlingit practices that influence the fantasy book that I read a few weeks ago, The Door on the Sea by Caskie Russell, who's also Tlingit, and the practices of having two clans kind of in one tribe, and how Eagle clan member always marries a, I think, Raven clan member, and how they live together and are dependent on each other, because that's an aspect of The Door on the Sea as well. And those authors just being from the same area, having the same influences of the nature and landscape of the southwestern part of Alaska being so prominent in their books. So that's Blonde Indian by Ernestine Hayes. The last book that I'm going to read for this video, and hopefully finish it and get this video posted this upcoming weekend, is How We Go Home, edited by Sarah Sinclair. This is a collection of essays, articles, interviews with modern natives, native activists talking about, in a colonized land, how do we go home? I don't really know much more about it than that, but I do love essay collections. More often I'm reading ones by a singular author, but it'll be great to get all the different perspectives that went into this book. So I'm interested to get started on this and get some energy and calls to action from it, and I think that'll be a great way to round out the video. I'm at my mom's place for the holidays, which is why the background looks different. This was my bedroom and now it's the guest bedroom, and so it goes with the bedrooms of adult children that have moved out. But I finished How We Go Home last night, and I had said that it was a series of essays, but actually there's only 2 essays in the appendix, and then the rest of the book is these 9 interviews with different Indigenous leaders and activists from all around North America. So there are with Canadian and American Indigenous people that get interviewed in here. And again, as with Blonde Indian, I'm not going to star rate this because it's just interviews with folks telling their story. And very sad, lots of through lines of substance abuse and young pregnancy, intergenerational trauma, reservation schools either affecting them or affecting their parents or grandparents, and there were people of all ages being interviewed in here, which was really cool. So much of what is talked about in here and explained in the appendices to give more context behind what some of these people are saying is that the institutions of the Canadian and US governments are extremely racist and colonialist institutions that deliberately assimilated and caused a genocide, and we're still feeling the effects of that, and will be for generations probably. That's all, you know, depressing, but we can't let it make it so that we don't act and that we don't keep learning and growing and making changes and reparations moving forward. I learned a lot from this book, and it was so inspiring to have people who are struggling themselves being leaders and helping out people in their community. thinking about how I can help in my community and how I can help Indigenous folks. There's a local thing that I'll link to called Real Rent Duwamish. If you're living in like the greater Seattle area, you can pay this rent towards the Duwamish tribe, and various ways to help out homeless people, incarcerated people who are disproportionately Indigenous to the rest of the population. Yeah, this is the kind of thing that I'm never gonna be like obsessed with, I think, because it is just a series of interviews, but I think that it was well done, and I'm glad that I bought it and glad that I read it. I'm really grateful to all the contributors to participating in this. That's gonna wrap up my Native American Heritage Month reading vlog. Again, I'm grateful to all of the brilliant authors that I read from and all of the editors and the audiobook narrators that I listened to. If you can, please go support local Indigenous people in your community and keep reading and educating yourself about Indigenous people and Indigenous issues. Thank you very, very much for watching. I will be back next week with my wrap up for the month, so I will see you then. Bye.